The tariffs are also expected to make a significant dent in the resource sector. Joining us now is John Desjarlais, the Executive Director of the Indigenous Resource Network. John, appreciate you taking some time for us here today. The Indigenous Resource Network represents Indigenous peoples involved in the resource sector. How concerned are you about these tariffs?
Incredibly concerned, and I think for a lot of reasons. Of course, there's concerns in terms of the economic impact that these tariffs will have on the resource sector, but especially concerned as they relate to Indigenous people. As we know, a lot of the communities are in remote locations that don't necessarily have the market diversity, so a lot of them are reliant on these single industry sources. And so, whatever impact they have, they're going to have a considerable detrimental impact on these communities that count on them for livelihood and jobs and procurement and whatnot. Further to that, really concerned because a lot of the communities have arrangements or agreements which see resource revenue sharing, right? And so whatever impact they have to, these different industries, it's going to have that type of detrimental impact to these communities. Now we're seeing much more communities engaged in ownership. So not just kind of that follow through or cascading impact, but direct impact on, the revenues and profits that are generated from them. And Indigenous communities are continuing to make stride. And this is a potential major setback.
Right. Should this turn into a lengthy trade war, what types of supports would you like to see for those impacted?
I think there's again, diversification support for these communities to help kind of navigate that are very reliant on a lot of these single sources of income to be able to support their communities. Further development of, value chains of these markets to ensure, sovereignty and security of these different types of commodities. In the energy side, what does it look like, developing our resources and then exporting to other countries look like? On the commodity side, what does manufacturing and developing through a lot of these resources look like, and how do we include Indigenous communities in those conversations as well too? I think there's a lot of things we can do, but hopefully we don't have to engage in this too far. Hopefully, I think we'll realize there's a considerable economic impact on either side of the border, and come to some type of reasonable agreement. But in the interim, I think we need to think about kind of that sovereignty, the security, that Canada and the Indigenous people have, and then start to look at how do we diversify, how do we ensure we have stable trading partners going forward.
You and I were talking about Forestry before this, one of the largest employers of Indigenous peoples in this country that's already been hit hard in recent decades. What do you think the impact could be there?
That's one where, the impact could be considerable. That's where you actually see Indigenous businesses engaged on the end side, on the product side, that are shipping products right to the U.S. So there's a direct impact on that, on those communities specifically. And forestry sector is a considerable employer of Indigenous people, again, in those remote and rural locations. And so impact on the industry. Indigenous people are industry through managing forests, through the harvesting, and then of course, the shipping of refined products and to different places, including the U.S. And so, it would be considerable. It would be painful.
There's been a lot of talk, I guess, on the longer term about resurrecting once canceled pipeline projects like Energy East and even Keystone XL. That's an interesting one. Are you supportive of moving energy projects once canceled, moving those forward, and other resource development projects out there on the books?
Absolutely. I think we are supportive because, we're built off of a network community that is supportive and want to explore that. It's an opportunity to revisit what went wrong and then look at them from a different perspective. I think in today's time, we look at energy projects much differently. 15, 20 years ago, we didn't look at kind of projects from a pure partnership perspective. How do we do this together? We do that much better now. We're seeing energy projects being developed in queue and in line with communities with strong support and consent around those. So we supporting those people those communities that want to engage in it. The discussion is ever more important now because as we talk about security and sovereignty, How do we diversify so we're not exporting a majority of resources to one trading partner, where we can diversify and export to a variety of trading partners. And again, that combined with the fact that Indigenous people are increasing at a great rate their equitable participation in these projects, I think it's a good time to re-explore these, because Indigenous people will have a different position. We see communities as leverage, as strength in terms of developing projects, and we should revisit the viability of that and the risks and managing the risks around those. And I think we think about those things differently now, and we should put them back on the table.
John, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate you taking some time.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Dennis.